Hot 47 in the morning. A woman in a navy coat walks up the steps of a federal courthouse. A hand stops her. Then a palm cracks across her face and her head snaps sideways, and her briefcase hits the stone and bursts open. And 50 pages of paperwork go scattering across the wet steps in the pale March light handcuffs. He never looks at the papers. 90 minutes later, he's on the stand, under oath, telling a courtroom about the dangerous woman he heroically subdued. Every word recorded. Every word a lie. He's done this 52 times before, and it has worked 52 times before. Except this morning, the woman in handcuffs is smiling, because she saw the nameplate in the hallway. Because those papers were a federal arrest warrant. And the name typed on it is his. There is a photograph on the kitchen shelf. Small, cracked at the corner where it fell during the move in 2019. And nobody fixed it because Calvin said he would get to it. Then Cal got sick. Then Calvin was gone. And the cracked photograph stayed exactly where it was, because moving it felt like admitting something she was not ready to admit. In it, a woman in a black robe stands at a podium. She is 33 years old. She is terrified. You cannot tell because her chin is up and her shoulders are back, and her hands are perfectly still on the podium's edge. Her husband stands behind her, one hand on her shoulder. He is grinning like a man who has won something he had. Loretta Mae Winslow woke at 5:45 on the morning of March 12, 2024. Same time she had woken every morning for 21 years. Her body had decided, somewhere around year 3 on the bench, that 5:45 was simply when the day started. No negotiation, no snooze button, just eyes open, ceiling, and the particular quality of morning silence that meant the city was still deciding whether to be cruel today. She lay there for 45 seconds. Counted them. Old habit. Calvin had teased her about it once. Said it was the most judge thing he had ever heard. She had disagreed. She had kept the habit anyway. The kitchen was dark except for the light of the stove. Calvin had started that. Said overhead lights before 6 a.m. were an act of violence against the human soul. She had disagreed about that too. She had kept that habit too. Coffee was strong and black. She stood at the counter and drank it slowly and looked out the window at the corner of West Huron and North Dearborn where the street lights were still on and a man in an orange vest was hosing down the sidewalk in front of the convenience store. And the city was doing what cities do at 5:51 in the morning, just existing. There was a folder on the counter, black, thick, rubber banded shut because there were so many pages inside that the clasp stopped working 2 weeks ago, and she had not repeated it because she kept meaning to and had not. She did not open it this morning. She already knew what was inside. Had read every page so many times she could recite certain paragraphs the way some people recite scripture. Dates, names, case numbers, patterns, 52 complaints, each one a name, each name a person, each in a story that the system had decided was not worth telling. Today, that changed. Today she was going to sign the warrant. She's finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, set it upside down in the drying rack the way Calvin had always hated, because he said cups should be dried right side up, or what was the point? She put the folder in her briefcase and called Aubrey at 6:15. Aubrey picked up on the second ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant she had not slept, which Loretta chose not to address because Aubrey was 24 years old and in her final year at Yale Law, and some things you just let go. Mom. Not a question, just, Mom. Good morning, baby. It's not even 6:30. I know what time it is. A pause. The particular pause that meant Aubrey was deciding how to say something she had already decided to say. Are you sure about today? There it was. I'm sure about today. I read the caller file again last night, the whole thing. Another pause. Mom. This man know what he is. He's dangerous. He's protected. He has Pritchett in his corner. And Pritchett has the union. And the union has 3 city council members, and you're going in there alone, Aubrey. Silence. I've been sitting on that bench for 21 years, Loretta said. Not harsh, just steady. I know what I'm doing. The silence on the other end was different now. Softer. The worried kind that only love produces. Call me when it's done, Aubrey said finally. I will. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. She hung up, stood in the kitchen with the phone in her hand. The night before, at 11:47 p.m., her office phone had rung. She had been at her desk, reviewing the final pages of the warrant. The phone rang, and she picked it up, and there was silence on the other end. Not empty silence. Occupied silence, the kind where someone is breathing, deciding. Then a voice, low, young, careful, "Don't go alone tomorrow." That was all. She had said hello twice. The line went dead. She had sat with the receiver in her hand for a long moment. Then she had set it down. Then she had looked at the warrant in front of her. Then she had kept working. Because here is the thing about Loretta Mae Winslow. She grew up in Sandtown, Winchester, Baltimore. She grew up in a neighborhood where the city did not come when you called, where the men with badges were not always the safe ones. Where her mother worked the night shift cleaning offices and buildings. She would never be allowed to own and left notes on the kitchen table for a daughter she barely got to see. On paper that had gone soft at the folds from being read so many times, her mother had written, "Learn everything. That's the only thing they can't take. You do not grow up in Sandtown, Winchester, and spook easy. You just don't." She picked up the briefcase, walked to the door, looked back once at the photograph on the shelf. The woman at the podium, the man grinning behind her. "Today's a big day, Cal," she said quietly. She went to work. She arrived at the federal courthouse on West Jackson Boulevard at 8:43 in the morning. Navy wool coat, dark slacks, low heels, hair up the way she wore it every day. She had a full docket. The briefcase in her left hand, black leather, worn at the corners, a gift from Calvin when she made the federal bench in 2003. "For the briefcase you're going to need now," he had said. Like she did not already have 6 briefcases. Like this one was somehow different. It was different. She had used it every day since. She came up the sidewalk from the east, the way she always did when she did not drive, which was Tuesdays, Thursdays, and when the weather was still cold enough to make walking feel like intention. The courthouse steps were wet. A thin March sun was doing its best and failing. She was running through the 9 o'clock docket in her head. After the warrant, she had 2 motions hearings and a sentencing and a bail review that was going to take longer than anyone wanted. She was thinking about the bail review. She was thinking about what she wanted for lunch. She was not thinking about the man on the steps. He was standing at the top of the main entrance, broad, a uniform pressed to a crease that would have impressed a drill sergeant, hands at his sides. The posture of a man who had stood in exactly this position thousands of times and felt exactly this comfortable doing it. Officer Brant Kohler, 47 years old, 17 years on the force, 52 complaints dismissed across that career. Each one a small permission slip the system handed him without realizing what it was giving. He did not know her, she knew him. Every line of his face, every entry in his record, every name attached to every complaint that had been filed and dismissed and filed again and dismissed again across 17 years. He did not know that. Hey, not excuse me, not ma'am, not good morning. Hey, like she was a car parked somewhere inconvenient. Loretta kept walking. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" She stopped at the base of the steps, 3 steps below him, which put him physically above her. She clocked this immediately and filed it away. "Into the building," she said. "I work here, yeah?" He looked her up and down, slowly, the way that is designed to feel like assessment but is actually just dominance wearing a costume. "You got credentials?" "I do." "Then show them." She shifted the briefcase to her right hand and reached into her coat pocket, unhurried, deliberate. She was halfway through the motion when he moved. Later, the camera footage would show it took 11 seconds. Later, people would watch those 11 seconds on their phones and their laptops and their tablets and feel their stomachs drop every time, even knowing what came after. His palm caught her across the left cheek with a crack that echoed off the stone facade of the building. Her head snapped sideways. The briefcase left her hand. It hit the steps and burst open. The clasp she had meant to replace and hadn't, and now 50-some pages of federal warrant documentation were airborne, scattering across wet courthouse steps in the pale March sun. Her cheek was on fire. Her ears were ringing. She straightened, did not stumble, did not cry out, did not do the thing that pain wants you to do, which is react, which is show him that it landed. She straightened, and she looked at him, and something in that look, calm in a way, that was not the calm of someone who had given up, but the calm of someone who was watching, recording, filing every second of this into a place he would never be able to reach. Something in that look made Brant Kohler's certainty waver, just for a second. Then he grabbed her arm, and the handcuffs came out. Officer Tomas Ibarra stood 6 feet away, 29 years old, 2 years on the job, from Pilsen, south of the Loop, where his grandmother still lived in the same house she had lived in since 1971, and asked him every week if he was being careful. He was watching. Pi had been watching since Collar stepped in front of the woman on the steps. Something had tightened in his chest the way it tightened, sometimes when he knew what was coming, and could not make himself move fast enough to stop it. He knew who this woman was. He had known since 11:30 the previous night when he had found the internal roster in the break room's files by accident, looking for something else. Seen the photograph, seen the name, looked at the photograph again, and felt the bottom drop out of something in his chest. He had called from his personal phone at 11:47. Blocked the number, whispered into the receiver, and hung up before she could ask. He had thought that would be enough. And then he watched the handcuffs click shut around the wrists of a federal judge and understood, with a clarity that sat in his stomach like cold water, that it had not been enough, that he had known it would not be enough, that he had done it anyway, 'cause it let him sleep at night. And that was a thing he was going to have to live with. He bent down and gathered the scattered pages from the steps, stacked them carefully, set them back in the briefcase, closed it, carried it inside. He told himself this was the most helpful thing he could do. He knew, even as he thought it, that this was not true. The walk down the main corridor of the federal courthouse took approximately 90 seconds. Loretta walked it the way she had walked it for 21 years. Measured steps, chin level, eyes forward. The building was warming up for the day. Clerks with coffee cups, attorneys in suits checking phones, a woman from the administrative office laughing at something, hand over her mouth. The ordinary life of a courthouse at 8:50 in the morning. Some people looked. Ost did not, because in a courthouse you develop a trained in curiosity about the business of other people. You learn not to look too hard at what isn't yours. Collar had her by the arm, 2 paces ahead of Barbara, steering her toward the temporary holding room adjacent to Courtroom 3. Courtroom 3. She was aware of this the way you are aware of your own heartbeat. She could feel the familiar corridor opening to her left. The corridor she had walked down every working morning for 2 decades, past Judge Oak's temporary chambers, and the court reporter's room, and the break room where someone always burned the coffee, and nobody ever cleaned the microwave. The corridor that led to her courtroom, and there, on the wall beside the entrance, the placard, bronze, slightly tarnished at the lower left corner, because she had never gotten around to having it polished. And it had been slightly tarnished for approximately 4 years, and it was the kind of thing you stop seeing when you see it every day. Hon. J.L.M. Winslow Courtroom 39A. She stopped walking, just for a moment, just 1 step's worth. Collar yanked her arm. Keep moving. She looked at the placard. Then she looked at Collar, and she smiled. Not a big smile, not victorious, not even really happy, just quiet. Like a woman who has just confirmed something she already suspected, and is now simply waiting for the rest of the story to catch up. Collar did not understand the smile. It unnerved him. He would not admit this, but it did. He shoved her through the door of the holding room and closed it behind her. Courtroom 3, the room where Loretta Mae Winslow had spent 21 years of her life. Not hers by birth, not hers by luck, hers by every essay and scholarship application. And late night in the law library and morning, she got up in Sandtown, Winchester, when she could have stayed down and did not stay down. Acting Judge Clifford Oakes was seated behind her bench. 66 years old and 8 months from retirement, he had the air of a man who was already, in some essential way, on a beach in Florida. He had agreed to cover this morning's hearings as a favor to the scheduling office. He had settled into the chair. He had picked up the gavel. He had not apparently noticed whose gavel it was. Prosecutor Diane Stoll stood at the prosecution table. 44 years old, ambition wearing a blazer, with prosecution record that looked good on paper, and a particular satisfaction in certain types of cases she would never describe accurately if asked. She had lost a case to Loretta Mae Winslow in 2018, a civil rights matter she had been certain she owned. She had not owned it. She had not forgotten. When Collar brought in the woman in handcuffs and Stoll saw the bruise already blooming on the left cheek, something moved in the corner of Stoll's mouth. Just slightly, just enough. Collar testified with the ease of a man who had done this many times, which he had. 52 complaints, 17 years, the system catching him and releasing him, over and over like a fish too small to keep. He stood at the front of the courtroom and told a story. A good story, technically, internally consistent, structure, beginning, middle, end, suspicious individual, verbal aggression, Minimum necessary force. She was carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents, he said. Based on the judicial letterhead and case numbers, we believe she may have been planning to impersonate court personnel. From the defendant's chair, Loretta looked at him. She did not react. She was thinking, "You are describing a federal arrest warrant. You are standing in a federal courthouse, calling a federal arrest warrant stolen goods, in front of a court reporter." She was thinking, the court reporter's name is Frances Chu. She has worked in this building for 9 years. She types 140 words per minute. She was thinking, Frances is getting every single word. Ibarra testified next. Short, flat, voice like a man reading from a card he did not write. He corroborated the broad outlines, did not meet Loretta's eyes, did not elaborate on anything Kohler had not already addressed. He was doing the minimum. She noted this. Stoll stood. Your Honor, the state recommends we proceed with charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. The defendant's attempt to frame this as a civil rights issue. I haven't framed anything, Loretta said. Quiet, level. But the room heard it. Stoll turned, looked at her. Something passed across her face. Not recognition of identity, but recognition of quality. The texture of a voice that was used to being listened to. The defendant, Stoll said with pointed emphasis, has not been given the floor. Then I'd like the floor, Loretta said. Oakes looked up from his notes, slightly annoyed, slightly intrigued against his will. The defendant will have an opportunity to make a statement. Then I'll wait, Loretta said. She folded her hands in her lap. The handcuffs clinked softly. She waited. When she stood to speak, the room shifted. It is hard to explain what it looks like when a person occupies a space with complete authority. Something in the carriage, something in the way air moves around a person. Something that has nothing to do with height or volume or the arrangement of features on a face. Loretta May Winslow stood in handcuffs at the defendant's table in her own courtroom, and the room shifted. Thank you, Your Honor. Clear, unhurried. The voice of someone who had opened 10,000 hearings. I want to begin by addressing several factual inaccuracies in Officer Kohler's testimony. Oakes blinked. Stoll's pen stopped moving. Kohler, who had been leaning against the wall, with the posture of a man who had already won, came slightly away from the wall. Officer Kohler testified that I was trespassing on government property. I was walking on a public sidewalk. The Supreme Court ruling in Hague v. Committee for Industrial Organization establishes clearly that public sidewalks adjacent to government buildings are traditional public forums. I had every constitutional right to be there. Oakes was writing. Officer Kohler also testified that the documents in my briefcase were, quote, stolen legal materials related to a suspected identity fraud scheme. I'd like to address that claim specifically. Those documents are authentic federal legal materials. I have legitimate professional access to them, and I would ask this court to issue an immediate preservation order for all electronic surveillance data from this morning, courthouse security cameras, body camera backup files, and any mobile device recordings. Between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m., Stoll stood. Objection. The defendant cannot simply make evidentiary demands without proper representation. Pro se defendants have the constitutional right to present and request evidence under the Sixth Amendment, Loretta said, without looking at Stoll. Brady v. Maryland establishes the prosecution's obligation to preserve potentially exculpatory evidence. Both standards apply here. Silence. The court reporter typed. Oakes stared at the woman in handcuffs, with an expression cycling through several stages of confusion, before settling on something that looked like the beginning of understanding. Miss Williams, Loretta said, because she had decided very deliberately to give the name on the placard in the hallway a few more minutes. Not yet, let it build. Miss Williams, Oakes said, and something new had entered his voice. You appear to be unusually familiar with legal procedure. I have some experience with it, she said. Are you an attorney? I have a law degree. From the briefest pause. Yale, she said. The court reporter's fingers stuttered slightly and resumed. In the back of the room, Bailiff Raymond Tubbs had been standing against the wall, with the particular stillness of a man who had spent 14 years learning how to be furniture. 58 years old, worked in this building, since the year his youngest daughter started middle school. Now she had 2 kids of her own. He looked at the woman in handcuffs. He looked at her for a long time, and then the color went out of his face in a way that happened very quickly and very completely. The way color leaves a thing when something essential has shifted beneath it. He straightened, looked at the door, looked at the woman in handcuffs one more time. Then he moved toward the door with a speed that was, for Raymond Tubbs, extraordinary. Not running, but close. The kind of walking that is running's polite cousin. Nobody noticed except Loretta. She caught his eye as he moved, gave him the smallest nod in the history of courthouse communication. He was out the door in 14 seconds. Oakes called a 15-minute recess. The room breathed. Caller watched the door close behind Raymond Tubbs. Looked at the garment bag in his peripheral vision. When Raymond returned 4 minutes later, looked at the wooden box. At Raymond's face, which was the face of a man who had just understood the dimensions of something enormous and was trying to hold himself together. He told himself this was nothing. He told himself he had controlled rooms like this before. He told himself the woman in handcuffs was playing a game she was going to lose. But he could not stop thinking about the smile on the courthouse steps, after the handcuffs, after her head snapped sideways and her briefcase hit the stone and her papers went everywhere. She had looked at the placard with her name on it and she had smiled. He had not understood it then. Standing in this room now, watching Raymond Tubbs carry a garment bag and a wooden box toward the holding room, he was beginning to. Court will recess for 15 minutes, Oakes said. The gavel came down. Caller looked at Loretta May Winslow. She was looking back at him, still smiling that small, quiet smile. And for the first time in 17 years, Brent, the caller, felt the specific cold of a man who has just realized he does not understand the rules of the game he has been playing. The room they put her in was small. Cinder block painted beige, a table, 2 chairs. A mirror on one wall that was not just a mirror, which had never been a secret to anyone who had spent time in courthouses. Raymond Tubbs set the garment bag on the table, set the wooden box beside it. His hands were not entirely steady. He had worked in this building for 14 years, and he had seen things in these halls that stayed with him. But he had never seen anything like this morning. Had never watched someone he recognized, someone whose name was on the wall outside, whose gavel he had carried to the bench hundreds of times, sit in handcuffs at the defendant's table while a man lied about her under oath. Judge Winslow. He stopped, swallowed, started again. I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you. Raymond. Yes, ma'am. Breathe. He breathed. You aren't part of this, she said. I know that. But I need you to do something for me right now. Anything. Your Honor, anything at all. She looked at the garment bag, at the wooden box. Give me a minute, she said. He understood. He went out and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. Loretta stood alone in the room. The building hummed around her, the particular hum of a large institution in motion. Elevators, the ventilation system, the distant murmur of other proceedings in other rooms. She had listened to this hum for 21 years and had stopped hearing it somewhere around year 4. She heard it now. Her left cheek throbbed. She pressed 2 fingers to it carefully. The bruise was setting in. She could feel the heat of it. The swelling at the cheekbone already beginning. It would be visible. It already was visible. Nothing to be done about that. Nothing she wanted to do about it either. She looked at herself in the mirror. Not at the room, at herself. A 54-year-old woman in a navy wool coat with her wrists still marked from the handcuffs and a bruise on her left cheek, and her hair still up, still neat, because nothing that had happened this morning had managed to touch her hair, and she was taking that as a small private win. She thought about Calvin. Not the photograph version, not the podium version, the kitchen version. Elbows on the counter at 6 in the morning, laughing at something on his phone and turning to show her, and she pretending she did not find it funny because he would be insufferable about it if she did. His hand on her shoulder in that photograph, the specific weight of it, the specific warmth. She thought about Aubrey in her apartment in New Haven, checking the news on her phone, probably already knowing something had gone wrong, probably already reaching for her keys. Her phone buzzed. Vivian Hartwell, Chief Judge of the Northern District of Illinois. Loretta's supervisor, technically. Her friend, practically. One of approximately 4 people on Earth who called her by her first name in a professional context and got away with it. She answered, Loretta, Vivian, thank God. Are you all right? I've been better. A pause that contained a whole conversation about what better meant and what it cost to say it simply. Effa has been here since 8:30, Vivian said. Her voice was measured in the way that voices get when someone is holding something very important very carefully. They know what happened. They've been in position since before you arrived. How many arrests? 7, including Pritchett. All of them are covered. The moment this proceeding concludes, they move. Loretta closed her eyes. 7. She had confirmed 5 names from the recording made in Pritchett's office on February 28th. The other 2 she had suspected but not verified. 7. They're waiting for your signal, Vivian said. From inside the courtroom, it has to come from you. I know. Loretta, a pause, different from the others, lower. There's something else. She waited. The call to your office last night, we traced it. Vivian's voice dropped by 1 register. It was Ibarra. He called from his personal cell at 11:47. Blocked the number. Loretta was quiet for a moment. Ibarra, 29 years old, 2 years on the job. Had stood on those steps this morning and watched and done nothing, and then picked up her papers and carried them inside. Like that was the thing that would balance the ledger. But he had called. The night before. From his personal phone. At 11:47, after whatever shift had ended. After whatever conversation with himself had finally landed somewhere he could not ignore. Don't go alone tomorrow, he had called. And then he had stood there and done nothing. Both things were true. Both things were his. Tell them to be ready, Loretta said. I'll give the signal when the sentencing record is complete. Understood. A pause. And Loretta, be careful in there. I'm always careful, she said. I know. Be more careful than that. She hung up, turned to the table. Raymond came back in. High had a small key in his hand, and he removed the handcuffs with careful, apologetic movements. Like a man trying to undo something that should not have been done. She thanked him. He stepped back. She unzipped the garment bag. The robe was black with gold trim at the collar and cuffs. She had worn this particular robe since 2011, when the previous one had given out at the left elbow in a way that could not be repaired. She had brought it back from the tailor 3 weeks later, and it had fit like a second skin ever since. She shook it out, put it on. The weight of it settled onto her shoulders, and something that had been held very tight in her chest for the past hour released just slightly. Not all the way, but enough to breathe around. She opened the wooden box. The gavel was dark walnut, heavy, solid, engraved on the handle in letters that had been there since 2003, in Calvin's handwriting, because he had insisted on writing out the inscription himself for the engraver to copy. To serve, not to be served. She picked it up, stood with it in her hand. 21 years, Cal. Look what they did to your courthouse. She looked at herself in the mirror one final time. The bruise on her left cheek had deepened to purple. She looked at it steadily, decided in that moment that she would not cover it, would not minimize it, not arrange herself to hide what had been done. It was evidence. It was hers. Let the room see it. She turned to Raymond Tubbs, who was standing very straight for a man of 58. When we go back in, she said, I need you to announce me properly. He set his shoulders, cleared his throat. The throat of a man preparing to say something that needed to be said correctly. Nice and loud, she said. I almost smiled. She crossed to the door, pushed it open, and walked back into her courtroom. All rise. Raymond Tubbs belted the room like something that had been waiting to be said for 14 years. The Honorable Judge Loretta May Winslow, presiding. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds where nobody in that courtroom breathed. Nobody moved. Nobody made a single sound, because the human body, when confronted with something it cannot immediately process, does what it has always done. Stops. It waits. It tries to understand what is happening before it decides what to do next. Brant Collar, who had been leaning against the prosecutor's table with the easy confidence of a man reviewing his victory, went the color of old paper. Diane Stoll's pen fell from her fingers and hit the floor, and nobody looked at it. Acting Judge Clifford Oakes rose from behind the bench. Her bench, with an expression that cycled through approximately 6 emotions in 4 seconds and landed on something that could only be described as a man, realizing he has been sitting in someone else's chair at someone else's dinner table and eating someone else's food, and the actual owner of the house has just walked through the front door. And Loretta May Winslow walked to the front of the courtroom, up the 3 steps, to the bench, her bench. She sat down, placed the gavel on the surface in front of her, looked up. Her eyes swept the room, taking in every face, every dropped jaw, every person who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what this morning had been. Then, in a voice that had opened 10,000 proceedings, Officer Collar, you may remain standing. Oakes came around the bench faster than a 66-year-old man had probably moved in several years. His robe caught on the corner of the chair and he pulled it free without looking, already talking. Your Honor, we didn't. I mean to say, Judge Oakes. He stopped. Thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected delay. You may return to your own docket. Hot unkind. Not designed to humiliate, designed to be finished. To close a chapter and open another one, and to make sure everyone in the room understood which was which. Oakes understood. Left quickly. The door swung shut behind him, and Loretta let the sound of it settle over the room like a period at the end of a sentence. Miss Stoll had retrieved her pen. Her face had been reconstructed into something that resembled composure from the outside. Your Honor, Stoll said carefully. Everything said in this room from this point forward is on the record. I want to make certain you understand that. A pause. I understand, Stoll said. Good. She looked at Caller. He was not gripping the table anymore. Both hands were at his sides. The certainty that had carried him through 17 years and 52 dismissed complaints was doing something it had never done before, but was failing him, visibly, in real time. In the room where he had testified under oath less than 2 hours ago, he had expected anger from her when she walked back in. He had braced for it. Anger he could work with. Anger followed a script he knew. What he got instead was something worse. Clarity, hers. Complete and quiet, and already 3 steps ahead of anything he could say. Officer Caller, she said. Approximately 90 minutes ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom. I'd like to revisit that testimony. The tablet had been placed on the bench by Raymond Tubbs during the recess. In 15 minutes, he had coordinated with courthouse security, pulled 3 separate files from the backup server, and transferred them to the device with the efficiency of a man who had been waiting for a reason to be useful for quite some time. This is footage from Courthouse Security Camera 7, Loretta said, turning the screen toward the courtroom. Positioned at the northeast corner of the main entrance, high definition, high time stamped at 8:47 a.m., she pressed play. The room watched. There was the sidewalk, wet and pale in morning light. A woman in a navy coat walking up from the east, briefcase in hand, moving with the unhurried purposefulness of someone who had made this walk thousands of times. There was Caller stepping into her path. The conversation, silent on this feed but visible in every gesture, every shift of weight, every choice of body position. 11 seconds, and then the slap. The room heard the intake of breath. Multiple people. Involuntary. The way certain things bypass the mind and land directly in the body. The footage continued. The grab, the handcuffs, the briefcase bursting open. The pages airborne in the pale March light. Loretta paused the video. Officer Caller. In this footage, do you observe any verbal aggression from the individual you apprehended? Any threatening behavior? Any legal justification for the use of physical force? The room waited. Caller said nothing. I'll note for the record that Officer Caller has not disputed the footage. She swiped to the next file. This is backup footage from your own body camera, Officer Caller, per the Cook County Law Enforcement Technologies Standards Act of 2019. All officer body camera footage in this jurisdiction is automatically uploaded to a county-secured backup server every 60 seconds. This protocol was implemented specifically because of incidents involving claimed equipment malfunctions. She let that settle. Every 60 seconds, she said again. Quiet, precise. Your camera footage uploaded its final segment at 8:44 a.m., 4 minutes before the incident, at which point the camera was manually disabled. Stoll went very still. Manually, Loretta said. Not a malfunction, a deliberate disabling. The backup server records both the footage and the method of interruption. This distinction is, legally speaking, the difference between equipment failure and evidence tampering under Title 18 of the United States Code. She pressed play on the second file. Body camera footage was different from security footage, intimate in the way that body cameras are intimate. You were seeing exactly what one person saw, from exactly where they were standing, in the unedited and unforgiving language of real time. The footage was from 4 minutes before the incident. A parking area. Cold morning light. And Caller's voice, speaking to Ibarra, clear as anything that had ever been recorded in this jurisdiction. Today I end this judge's investigation. She wants to sign a warrant for me? I'll sign one for her first. Ibarra's voice quiets her. Ray, get back in the car. The footage ended. The silence in the courtroom was a different kind of silence now. Not the stunned silence of the beginning, something heavier, something that had weight and texture, and would stay with every person in that room, long after they walked out of it. This was not a routine security encounter, Loretta said. She set the tablet down. This was a planned interference with a federal judicial officer in the performance of her official duties, premeditated, coordinated. A federal felony under Title 18, United States Code, Section 111. Caller's head dropped, not in remorse, not yet. On the posture of a man watching the walls close in, a finding, for the first time in 17 years, that there was no gap to move through, no complaint to dismiss, no union rep to call, no version of the story he could tell that the footage had not already contradicted. Officer Ibarra. Tomas Ibarra was sitting in the gallery. He had not been asked to leave. He had not been asked to stay. He had simply stayed, the way people stay when they are trying to determine which way a thing is going to fall, and whether they are going to be on the right side of it when it does. He looked up. Loretta looked at him, not with contempt, not with pity, with the particular quality of attention that had made her effective in this room for 21 years. The Achins saw not just what a person was doing, but what they were deciding. "I have one question," she said. "What did you see this morning?" The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when a question has been asked that everyone knows matters. Caller turned his head just slightly toward Ibarra. Enough. The look of a man who did not need words because 17 years of history spoke instead. Ibarra saw the look. He looked away from it, back at Loretta. 8 seconds. 9, 10. And then Tomas Ibarra, 29 years old, from Pills and south of the Loop, whose grandmother asked him every Sunday if he was being careful, stood up. "Your Honor." His voice was not steady. He did not pretend it was. "I want to change my earlier testimony." Caller made a sound, low. "Warning." "Officer Caller," Loretta said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Sit down." Caller sat. "Go ahead, Officer Ibarra," she said. "I heard Officer Caller say what's on that recording. In the parking area, before we got out of the car. I heard it and He stopped. I didn't stop him. I told myself I didn't know how bad it would get, but I knew. I knew it was wrong, and I stood there anyway." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I called the judge's office the night before," he said. 11:47 p.m. I blocked the number. I told her not to come alone, because I knew what Ray was planning, and I couldn't. He stopped again. "I wasn't brave enough to do more than that. I'm sorry." The last two words fell into the room like stones into still water. "Why didn't you do more than the call?" Loretta asked, the question nobody wanted asked, the one with the most honest answer in the room. "Because I was afraid of what would happen to me," he said. The room received this. Nobody spoke. "Thank you for telling the truth, Officer Ibarra," Loretta said after a moment. Not warm, not cold, even. The tone of someone who understands that truth when finally spoken. "There deserves to be acknowledged without sentiment. Please sit down." He sat. Now she turned to the folder Raymond had placed on her right during the recess. Blue tab, thick, numbers handwritten on the outside in her own writing, because she had assembled it personally over 5 months. "Because there were things you did not delegate. Not this, not names." She opened it. "I want to speak about a record," she said. Her voice changed registers. Slightly lower, the way it got when she was not performing authority but simply using it, as naturally as breathing. "Officer Brant Caller has been a member of the Cook County Sheriff's Department for 17 years. During that time, he has received commendations for response time and departmental cooperation. He is not by any external measure a man the system has ever had a problem with." Stoll frowned. This was not the direction she had expected. 52 complaints were filed against Officer Caller between 2007 and 2023. 52 individual reports by 52 individual citizens who believed something had been done to them that was wrong. Each report was reviewed. Each was dismissed as unsubstantiated. She turned a page. "I want to speak about 2 of those 52. She looked up. Naomi Reese, 69 years old, lives on West 63rd Street in the Inglewood neighborhood of Chicago. Retired grandmother of 4. Her daughter Beverly still checks on her every morning before work, because that is the kind of family that does not let its elders sit alone with hard things." In November of 2008, Mrs. Reese was returning from a grocery store on foot. Officer Caller stopped her 1 block from her own home, according to her complaint, which she wrote herself, by hand, on the form she picked up from the district office. She wrote, He called me a name I have not been called since 1967, and he pushed my face against my own fence in front of my neighbor's children, and when I asked for his badge number, he laughed. Loretta set the page down. Mrs. Reese filed that complaint in 2008, dismissed as unsubstantiated. She filed again in 2010, dismissed. 2014, dismissed. 2019, dismissed a beat. 4 complaints over 11 years. The same woman, the same incident. 4 times she walked into a government office and said something was done to me that was wrong. 4 times the system looked at what she wrote and said, not enough, not credible, not worth our time. She closed that section of the folder, opened the next. Caleb Drummond. She found him in the gallery. 3rd row, left side. 22 years old. Sitting very straight with his hands resting on his thighs. His face doing the specific thing that faces do when you have spent years practicing not reacting. When you have learned, in the hardest possible school, that reacting costs you. When you have had to be careful about everything for so long, that careful has become the only way you know how to be. Mr. Drummond, Loretta said, would you stand, please? He stood. Caleb Drummond was a freshman at DePaul University in March of 2020, Loretta said, keeping her eyes on him. He was 18 years old and 3 weeks into his first semester of college on a partial academic scholarship. He was walking back to his dormitory from a convenience store at 9:15 in the evening. Officer Collar stopped him. According to the arrest report, Mr. Drummond was acting suspiciously. A search of his backpack revealed 2 bags of methamphetamine. She paused. Mr. Drummond had never used methamphetamine. He had never possessed it. He had no prior record of any kind. He was 18 years old, 3 weeks into his first semester, and his backpack had been searched by a man with a badge. Another pause. Harder. He was convicted in May of 2020, sentenced to 4 years, released in September of 2023 after serving 3 years on good behavior. She looked at him, lost his scholarship. He lost his place at DePaul. He lost the years that other people his age spent deciding who they were, building the ordinary infrastructure of a life. He lost those years inside a cell. She let that be in the room. Let it breathe. The FBI investigation connected to this case uncovered body camera footage from a second officer present during Mr. Drummond's arrest in 2020. That footage, which had been stored on a department server for 4 years without review, shows clearly and without ambiguity Officer Cockle placing 2 bags in the exterior poxycotis with Mr. Drummond's backpack before search was conducted. A sound moved through the gallery. Not words. The sound that comes before words when something lands in the body before the mind has organized a response. You can sit down, Mr. Drummond, Loretta said gently. The voice she used at home, not the bench voice, the other one. Thank you for being here today. He sat. His hands returned to his thighs, steady now in a way they had not been a moment ago, as if being named had given him something solid to stand on. Collar looked at him. For the first time since Loretta had walked back into this room, Collar looked at a specific person, rather than the middle distance of his own catastrophe. He looked at Caleb Drummond, sat with what he was looking at. Something moved across Collar's face that was not remorse and not shame but was adjacent to both, in the neighborhood, close enough that you could see where it was heading, even if it had not arrived. Loretta watched it happen, did not comment, filed it away. I want to address, she said, the documents in my briefcase. She reached under the bench, brought out the briefcase, black leather, worn at the corners. The clasp still broken because she had meant to replace it and had not gotten around to it. The same clasp whose failure had sent 23 pages of federal warrant documentation airborne across wet courthouse steps at 8:47 this morning. She set it on the bench, opened it. The pages inside were slightly damp at the edges. Ibarra had gathered them carefully, Lisa. Most of them were there. The order was wrong, but they were there. Officer Collar described these documents as stolen legal materials, possibly related to a fraud scheme involving the impersonation of court personnel. She took out the top page, turned it so the courtroom could see. This is a federal arrest warrant. It bears my signature and the seal of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. It was completed in my office on the evening of March 11th, 2024. Yesterday evening, 20 feet down that hallway. She set it on the bench surface in front of her. It is a warrant for the arrest of Officer Brant Collar on charges of civil rights violations under color of law, pattern of discriminatory policing and evidence tampering. The room. The specific sound of a room when something lands that everyone could feel coming and that still, somehow, lands harder than expected. Caller looked at the page, at the seal, at his name printed there in the formal language of the federal judiciary. His name, on an arrest warrant, in the hands of the person he had handcuffed on the courthouse steps 3 hours ago. Stoll stood. Sat down. Stood again. Mrs. Stoll, Loretta said. Your Honor, this represents a significant conflict of. Sit down, Miss Stoll. She sat. One more piece of evidence, Loretta said. The tablet again. This recording was obtained by the FBI Civil Rights Division as part of a 5-month investigation into systemic misconduct in the Cook County Sheriff's Department. It is dated February 28, 2024, 12 days ago. Was made in Lieutenant Vance Pritchett's office during a meeting attended by 7 individuals. She held the tablet, did not press play yet. I want everyone in this room to understand what they are about to hear. This is not one officer making a bad decision in a difficult moment. This is 7 people, in a room, making a plan. She pressed play. The first voice was Pritchett's. Thick. Certain. The voice of a man who had been certain for so long he had forgotten what uncertainty felt like. She's getting too close. The warrant's drafted. We've got maybe a week before she signs it. A second voice. So what do we do? Pritchett. We handle it the same way we handle everything else. We make the problem disappear before it becomes our problem. A third voice, and here several people in the gallery glanced toward Caller because the voice was recognizable. What do you need me to do? Pritchett. I need her stopped. I need the warrant delayed. I need something that puts her on the defensive before she can put us there first. Caller's voice, and if I can't find something? Pritchett. Then you make something. The sentence sat in the room. Then you make something. 7 people, Loretta said. At the time of this recording, 7 people knew that an active federal investigation existed, knew that a warrant was being prepared, and agreed collectively that the appropriate response was to interfere with the judge conducting it. She set the tablet down. As of the conclusion of this proceeding, all 7 of those individuals will be taken into federal custody. The arrests have been coordinated with the FBI and are ready to execute the moment this hearing ends. She looked at Kohler. He was not fighting it anymore. The posture of a man who has been fighting gravity his whole life and has simply, finally stopped. His hands were in his lap. His head was slightly bowed, not in prayer.
In a specific posture of someone processing the full
You were not the architect of this, Officer Kohler, Loretta said. You were the instrument. I want you to understand that I understand that distinction. She picked up the gavel. But I also want you to understand something else. The distinction does not change Naomi Reese's 4 complaints. It does not change the 3 years Caleb Drummond spent in a cell. It does not change what happened on those steps this morning. She looked at him directly. It does not change the bruise on my face. She touched her left cheek. Just briefly. Just enough. This court will recess for 20 minutes while I prepare the formal sentencing record. At the back of the room, Marcus Held, Caller's union-appointed attorney, who had arrived 40 minutes ago in an expensive suit and had been taking increasingly shell-shocked notes ever since, raised his hand. Before the recess, I must raise an objection to these proceedings under Judge Winslow's authority. Given that Judge Winslow is the alleged victim in the matter before this court, there exists a conflict of interest requiring recusal under federal standards of judicial conduct. Mr. Held, Loretta said, are you familiar with Title 28 United States Code, Section 455? A pause. Generally, Your Honor, specifically subsection B1, a longer pause. Section 455, subsection B1 provides for recusal of a judge with a personal interest in the outcome of a proceeding, Loretta said. But also provides for exception in cases where no other judge is available to prevent a failure of justice, and where the chief judge of the relevant district has issued specific written authorization. She looked toward the side of the room. Chief Judge Vivian Hartwell had entered quietly through said door approximately 6 minutes ago, 61 years old. The particular authority of someone who had spent decades deciding which hills were worth standing on and which were not. She was standing near the wall, a document in her hand. Chief Judge Hartwell is authorization, Larissa versus dated 8:52 this morning, 20 minutes after she was informed of the circumstances of my arrival at this courthouse. Hartwell crossed the room, handed the document to Raymond Tubbs, who carried it to Held, read it again, set it down on the table in front of him. Staten. Court is in recess, Loretta said. The gavel came down, not like thunder. Precise, measured. The sound of something that had been a long time coming and had arrived. Finally, exactly on schedule. Raymond Tubbs moved to open the chamber door. Caleb Drummond sat in the third row and looked at his hands. Tomas Ibarra sat with his eyes on the floor, thinking about a phone call made at 11:47 on a Monday night from a personal cell with a block number, and whether it had been enough, and the answer he already knew. It had not been enough, but it had been something. And in a room where most people had chosen nothing for 17 years, something was where everything began. 20 minutes. That was all the recess was supposed to be. 20 minutes while the courtroom held its breath and the building moved around it, and Brad Collar, in a chair in the room where he had testified under oath 2 hours ago, and stared at a spot on the floor that had nothing on it. Just floor. Just the specific nothing that a man looks at when he has run out of things to look toward. He was thinking about the smile on the courthouse steps. Not the bruise he had put on her face. Not the handcuffs. Not the things he had said on those steps that the security camera had recorded with the patient indifference of a machine that does not know who it is watching and does not need to know. He was thinking about the smile after her head had snapped sideways, after the briefcase had hit the stone, after the pages had scattered across the wet steps in the pale March light, and he had grabbed at her arm and the handcuffs had come out. She had straightened, looked at the placard on the wall with her own name on it, and smiled. He had not understood it then. He understood it now. She had known exactly what she was walking back into. Every second of that hearing. Sitting at the defendant's table in handcuffs, citing case law, requesting evidence preservation, asking for the floor with the calm of a woman who had already calculated where the floor would eventually lead. She had let him talk, let him build the story, let him testify under oath in her own courtroom about the dangerous individual he had heroically subdued. Let him describe her federal arrest warrant as stolen property. Let him wink at her when he stepped down from the stand. She had let him walk every step of the way to the edge, and then she had simply stepped aside. He had done the rest himself. The knowing of this was not quick. It came in pieces, the way cold comes, starting at the extremities and moving inward, and by the time you feel it in the center of you, it has already been everywhere else for a while. Ha sat in that chair and he felt it move through him, and there was nothing to do with it except sit there and let it finish. Marcus Held sat across from him, the expensive suit, the notepad covered in increasingly small writing, the expression of a man who had come to this building expecting to run a standard disciplinary defense and had instead been handed something that was going to require an entirely different category of skill. Ray, Held said quietly, I need you to understand the situation we're in. Kohler looked at him. The footage alone is enough to sustain the assault charge, Held said. The body cam audio adds premeditation. The warrant in her briefcase. He stopped. The warrant in her briefcase is going to be the thing that determines how long you're actually inside. That's what connects you to Pritchett. That's what the conspiracy charge hangs on. I know, Kohler said. Do you? Because I need you to. I know what I did, Marcus. Held looked at him for a moment. Set his pen down. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, they sat in silence for a while. In the gallery, Caleb Drummond had not moved from the third row. He was looking at his hands, not at Kohler, not at the front of the room, not at anything in particular, just at his hands, the way you look at something when you are checking that it is still there, when you are making sure the day is real and you are in it. He had been doing this his whole life in one form or another, checking that things were real, that he was really out, that the cell was really behind him, that the scholarship was really gone, and the 3 years were really gone, and the person he would have been if none of this had happened was really gone too, and he was standing on the other side of all of it in a clean shirt at 22 years old, trying and to figure out what you build when the foundation someone else chose for you has been taken away. He did not look at Kohler. He did not need to. Raymond Tubbs moved quietly through the room, straightening things that did not need straightening. Because Raymond Tubbs was a man who processed difficult moments by putting his hands to work. And this was the most difficult morning this courthouse had seen in a very long time. and there were a lot of things to straighten. At the side wall, Vivian Hartwell stood with a cup of coffee, and her phone and the expression of a woman managing 6 simultaneous situations while appearing to manage none of them. She had been in contact with the FBI field supervisor every 3 minutes since 9:15. 7 arrests. Coordinated, ready to move, waiting on the signal that would come when the gavel came down for the final time in that courtroom this morning. She looked at the clock on the wall. 15 minutes into the recess. 5 minutes remaining. In the judge's chamber, Loretta sat at her desk, the same desk she had sat at for 21 years, covered in the organized chaos of a person who knew where everything was and where nothing appeared to be. Case files and 3 hashtags. Sticky notes in yellow and blue and pink. A coffee mug on the right side that said World's Oakiest Judge in letters that had been read so many times the glaze had cracked slightly at the bottom of the first O. Aubrey had given her that mug 6 years ago. As a joke, she had said. Loretta had kept it because it was from Aubrey and because, on certain mornings, it was the most accurate thing in the room. She was not looking at the mug. She was looking at the sentencing record open on the desk in front of her. The formal document, the charges, the statutory ranges, the language of consequence rendered in the careful, specific vocabulary of federal law. She had written sentencing records for 21 years. Had sat in this chair and assembled the language of consequence for murderers and fraudsters, and people who had terrible things in moments of weakness, and people who had done terrible things as a way of life. She had never found it easy, had never wanted to find it easy. The day it became easy was the day she would know she had been in this chair too long. This one was not easy either, not because of the charges. The charges were clear. The evidence was unambiguous. The footage and the audio and the warrant in the briefcase and 17 years of dismissed complaints and the fresh bruise on her left cheek had assembled themselves into a record that left no room for interpretation, not because of the man. Collar had made his choices across 17 years and this morning, each choice a step down a path that ended in this room. It was not easy because of what it meant beyond this room. Because Naomi Reese had filed 4 times and dismissed more time, and the dismissals were not an accident and were not the work of one man and would not be solved by sentencing one man. Because Caleb Drummond had sat in a cell for 3 years, and the system that put him there had more members than the 7 being arrested today, and always had. Because the warrant in her briefcase was the beginning of something, not the end of it. And beginning things was always harder than it looked from the outside. She picked up her pen, wrote the first line of the sentencing record, then the second, then she kept going. The way you keep going when the work in front of you is the only honest response to the morning you have had. She was nearly finished when her phone buzzed. Not Vivian's this time, not Aubrey.
A number she did not recognize.
Local area code.
She almost let it go to voicemail, she answered. Silence on the other end.
Then a voice.
Old,
female, careful.
The way voices get careful when they are saying something that has been unsaid for a very long time.
Is this the judge? The one on the news this morning. Loretta set her pen down. This is Judge Winslow. My name is Beverly Reese, the voice said. Naomi Reese is my mother. I'm calling because she saw you on the news and she paused. She hasn't said anything yet. She's just sitting at the kitchen table. But I thought someone should call. I thought you should know. Loretta was quiet for a moment. Tell your mother, she said, that I am coming to see her this afternoon, after this proceeding is finished. A long pause. I will, Beverly Reese said. Thank you. The line went quiet. Loretta set the phone down, looked at the sentencing record, picked up her pen, finished it. The room stood when she entered, not because Raymond announced her. She had told him that was not necessary for the return from recess. They stood because the room had recalibrated during those 20 minutes, had shifted in the way that rooms shift when something true has been established inside them. When the walls have heard something they cannot unhear, and the people inside them have understood something they cannot understand. She took her seat, set the gavel down, looked at the room, all of it, every face, of the attorneys and the court staff, and the people who had been there for other matters and had stayed because it's understood that what was happening in courtroom 3 this morning was something they would be describing for the rest of their lives. Frances Chu at the stenography machine with her hands ready. Raymond Tubbs by the door with his shoulders set. Vivian Hartwell at the side wall with her phone in her hand and her eyes on Loretta. Caleb Drummond in the third row, Tomas Ibarra in the gallery, and Brent Collar in the chair that had, until 2 hours ago, been the defendant's chair and was now simply his. Before I read the formal record, Loretta said, "I want to say something," not as the judge delivering a sentence. As a woman who has spent 21 years in this building, believing that what we do here matters. She looked at her hands on the bench for a moment. I want to be honest with this room, including with myself. The room was completely still. This morning I was struck, handcuffed, called a name I have not been called in a long time. In front of my own courthouse, on my way to work, and I sat in that chair. She gestured toward the defendant's table. For 45 minutes while a man lied under oath about what he had done to me, while a prosecutor built a case around those lies, while a room full of people who work in this building looked at a woman in handcuffs and saw exactly what they had been told to see. She looked at the room. And the thing I keep returning to is this. What happened to me this morning has happened to other people in this building, in every building like this one, for years. The difference, the only difference, between my experience this morning and the experiences of the people in those 52 complaints is that I had something to walk back into. A beat. I had the robe. The room received this. Naomi Reese did not have the robe. Caleb Drummond did not have the robe. The 50 other people in that file did not have the robe. They had their word, which is all any of us actually have, underneath everything else. Underneath the credentials and the titles and the placard on the wall and the robe on our backs. We have our word. And for 17 years, this system looked at the word of 52 people and decided it was not enough. She straightened. What this court does today is not the end of that problem. I want to be clear about that. Sentencing one man does not repair what 17 years of dismissed complaints has done to 52 people and families CS, and the communities that watched it happen and learned, from watching it, not to bother reporting. Sentencing one man does not undo 3 years of Caleb Drummond's life. It does not give Naomi Reese back the 11 years she spent filing and waiting and being told her experience did not count. She looked at Collar, but it is a beginning, and beginnings have to start somewhere. Silence. Officer Collar, do you have anything you want to say before I read the formal record? Marcus Held leaned forward. The lawyer reflex, the instinct to intervene between a client and an open microphone.
Collar put his hand out, stopped him. "Yeah," he said low, rough at the edges the way voices get when they have been through something. "I do."
He looked at Loretta.
"I'm not going to make excuses. I know what I did. I've known for a while what I was doing."
He paused, not performing the pause, just needing it. Not all of it. Not Pritchett and the full plan. I didn't know how far that went until today. But the stops, the arrests, the way he stopped us again, started differently. Every time someone filed a complaint, I told myself they were trying to work the system, that I was the one who understood how things actually work, that I was doing the job the way the job needed doing. He looked down at the table. I told myself that for 17 years, and the system kept telling me I was right. Every dismissed complaint was the system saying, "You're right, keep going." And I kept going. He looked up, looked at Caleb Drummond. Caleb looked back at him. His face was doing the practice thing, the careful thing. The thing he had learned to do because reacting in certain situations had cost him, and he had learned the cost the hard way. "I'm sorry," Collar said, not to the room. To Caleb specifically, directly, without the cover of the general address. "I know what I took from you. I know an apology is." He stopped. "I know what it is and what it isn't. But I'm saying it anyway." Caleb looked at him for a long time. He did not speak, did not nod, did not accept or reject. He simply looked, with the composed, careful face of a young man who had learned that not every moment required him to make someone else feel better about what they had done to him, that his response or his silence was his, that it did not belong to the person asking for it. That was his right. Loretta did not push it. "Thank you, Officer Kohler," she said. "Sit down." She opened the sentencing record. On the charge of assault on a federal judicial officer in the performance of her official duties, in violation of Title 18, United States Code Section 111, which carries a mandatory minimum of 5 years. She looked up once, then back at the document. "I find Officer Brent Collar guilty as charged." Held wrote something, stopped, wrote something else. "On the charge of deliberate disabling of a body-worn camera with intent to suppress evidence, in violation of the Cook County Law Enforcement Technology Standards Act and the Federal Evidence Tampering Statute, I find Officer Brant Collar guilty as charged. The court reporter typed, steady, unbroken, on the charge of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, Title 42, United States Code, 1983, as evidenced by a documented pattern of racially discriminatory policing, spanning 17 years and 52 individual complaints. I find Officer Brant Collar guilty as charged. She turned a page. On the charge of perjury in the first degree for false testimony, given under oath in this courtroom, on the morning of March 12, 2024, I find Officer Brant Collar guilty as charged. She set the document down, the aggregate sentencing guidelines for these charges, accounting for the premeditated nature of the primary offense, the use of official position to facilitate the crime, and the documented 17-year pattern of conduct underlying the civil rights violation, placed the recommended range at 18 to 26 years. She looked at Collar. I am sentencing you to 22 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. The room was very quiet. Additionally, I am ordering the immediate suspension, without pay, of Officer Collar's law enforcement credentials, pending the conclusion of the federal investigation into the broader conspiracy. I am ordering the mandatory reopening of all cases in which Officer Collar served as the primary arresting officer during his 17 years of service. And I am ordering the establishment of an independent federal review board to examine the complaint dismissal practices of the Cook County Sheriff's Department for the period to 2007 through 2024. She looked up. Every complaint marked unsubstantiated will be reviewed by independent investigators with no departmental affiliation. Every single one. She held the gavel, did not lift it yet. 52 people filed complaints, she said. One more time. Because it needed to be said one more time. Because the number needed to live in this room and in the record and in the memory of everyone present. 52 times the system looked at what they wrote and said, not enough, not this time. Try somewhere else. A beat. This court has a different answer. The gavel came down, not like thunder. She had thought, somewhere in the long morning, that the moment would feel like thunder, that it would have that quality of the dramatic. The overwhelming, it was quieter than that. It was the sound of a door closing on something that had been open too long. Something that had let the cold in for 17 years. Something that should have been closed, complaint number 1, in 2008, when a 69-year-old woman walked into a district office and wrote by hand. He called me a name I have not been called since 1967. Was the sound of enough, and in a room that had been waiting, in various ways and for various lengths of time, for exactly that. Sound landed like what it was, the room, not all at once. The way rooms move after something large has happened in them. Gradually, like water finding its level. People turning to each other. A sound rising that was not quite speech and not quite breath, but somewhere between the two. How two federal officers who had entered through the side door during the recess, and who had been standing with the patient stillness of people who had been in position since 8:30 that morning, crossed the room and stood beside Collar. He did not resist, did not argue, did not look for an exit because he had understood, somewhere in those 20 minutes of recess, that there were none. He stood, and at the door he stopped, turned, looked back at Loretta. She was watching. You said, he started, stopped, tried again. You said the system told me it was fine, every dismissed complaint every time. Yes, she said. Was that true? What you said? She held his gaze. It doesn't mean you didn't know, she said. But yes, it's true. He nodded, once, slowly. The nod of a man who is not finding comfort in the answer, but who needed the answer to be honest and got what he needed. Then he walked through the door. It swung shut behind him. The room exhaled, collectively. The sound of something that has been held for a long time releasing all at once. Not celebration. Something more complicated. The specific emotional texture of people who have witnessed something real and are now in the first moments of understanding what it means for everything that comes next. Vivian Hartwell was on her phone before Collar cleared the door. One call. Short. The signal. And somewhere in this building and in 6 other locations across the city, federal officers who had been waiting since 8:30 that morning moved. Lieutenant Vance Pritchett, 6 others. 7 names from a recording made in an office on February 28. 7 people who had sat in a room and decided that a federal judge was a problem to be managed, rather than an officer of the court to be respected. All 7, simultaneously the way the operation had been designed. Vivian caught Loretta's eye across the courtroom, gave a small nod. Loretta nodded back. Stoll had gathered her files before the gavel came down and was already at the door, moving quickly, phone in hand. The retreat of a person who has understood that proximity to a catastrophe can become its own form of contamination. Loretta watched her go without comment. Stoll's choices and their consequences were a matter for another proceeding. Today had enough. Frances Chu saved her transcript file, then saved it again, then a third time, which was more times than she had ever saved a single document in 9 years of court reporting. But this particular transcript was something that warranted the extra care. She looked up from her machine and found Loretta looking at her. "Thank you, Frances," Loretta said. Frances nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." She saved it a 4th time. Raymond Tubbs moved through the room, straightening chairs, collecting water glasses, doing the quiet, necessary work of restoring a space after something large has moved through it. He had done this after hundreds of hearings. He had never done it after a morning like this one. "Raymond," Loretta said. He looked up. "Thank you." He straightened, held her gaze for a moment. Then, with the dignity of a man who understood that some things did not need more words than that. "Yes, Your Honor." Tomas Ibarra was waiting in the corridor outside courtroom 3. Not leaving. Not quite. Standing in the specific way of a person who knows they need to speak to someone and is not certain they have the right to initiate it. Who is waiting to see if the other person will come to them, or if the distance will be allowed to remain. Loretta came out of the courtroom and found him there. He straightened. "Officer Ibarra, Your Honor." They stood in the hallway. The ordinary traffic of the building moved around them. People with files, people with coffee, people between one thing and the next, absorbed in the particular busyness of a courthouse on a Tuesday. "What happens to me?" he said. Not a question exactly. The shape of a question, with the directness of someone who has decided to stop pretending he is not asking it. "The Federal Review will examine your involvement in the full scope of the conspiracy," she said. "Your testimony in this proceeding, both what you said initially and what you corrected, will be part of that record. Your phone call to my office on the evening of March 11th will be part of that record." He waited. "I can't promise you an outcome. I won't do that. But I will submit a full account of what happened in that courtroom today. Both things, the early testimony and the correction. The phone call and the silence on the steps. The full picture." He looked at the floor, then back at her. "I should have stopped him on the steps," he said. Yes," she said. "You should have." He flinched, just slightly. The flincher of who was hoping somewhere underneath the question that the answer would be different, that there would be a way to account for the phone call that made the silence on the steps something other than what it was. "There wasn't, but you didn't," she continued. "And then you sat in that courtroom, and you made a choice. Late, after the damage was done. But you made it." She paused. "You're going to have to live with the whole sequence, Ibarra, not just the part at the end."
He nodded. I know, he said.
"That's where you start," she said, with knowing. She looked at him for another moment. The look she gave to people in this building, when she wanted them to understand that she meant exactly what she had said, and nothing more and nothing less. "Don't waste the second chance," she said. She walked past him, down the corridor, through the building that had been her building for 21 years, past the placard with her name on it, past the break rooms where someone had burned the coffee again and nobody had cleaned the microwave, past the places she had walked so many thousands of times that she had stopped seeing them and was seeing them now, today, in the way that you only see familiar things when something has shaken the familiar loose and made it new again. Out of the building, into the March afternoon where the thin sun had decided finally to commit. The cab ride to Englewood took 40 minutes. She did not change out of the robe. The cab driver noticed and said nothing, which she appreciated. The city moved past Andos, south through the loop, past the neighborhoods the guidebooks did not list and the tourism office did not photograph. Real neighborhoods, the kind where people had lived for generations, where the same systems that had dismissed Naomi Reese complaints 4 times had been making similar calculations about similar people for a very long time. She knew this part of the city the way she knew her own kitchen, by memory, by the specific quality of afternoon light it got in the hour before the sun started down. She had grown up in a neighborhood like this one. Different city, Baltimore, same shape, same relationship to the places that made decisions about it without consulting it. The cab stopped on 63rd Street. The house was tough brick, well maintained in the specific way of someone who takes pride in the work and does not have extra money to make it easy. Front walk swept clean. Window boxes empty for winter, but properly prepared for spring. A welcome mat by the door with letters faded to a cheerful pink that had probably once been red. Loretta stood at the gate for a moment. She had never done this in 21 years. Never arrived unannounced at the home of a victim connected to a case she had adjudicated. There were professional reasons for this. Structural reasons. The same reasons that kept her behind the bench rather than on the floor of the courtroom. That maintained the necessary distance between the institution of justice and the people it was supposed to serve. But Naomi Reese had filed 4 complaints over 11 years. The last time she had walked into a district office on a Wednesday because someone at her church said try one more time, and nobody had ever called her back. Loretta opened the gate, walked up the front path, knocked. She heard movement inside, slow and deliberate, the movement of a woman of 69, who was not going to hurry for anyone. The door opened. Naomi Reese was small, smaller than the photograph in the complaint file, which had been taken 16 years ago. White hair, dark eyes that had the particular quality of stillness in them that comes from spending a long time paying attention to things other people walk past. She looked at Loretta, at the robe, at the bruise on the left cheek, which had deepened now to a color that no makeup would have covered even if Loretta had tried. "Mrs. Reese," Loretta said, "my name is Loretta Mae Winslow. I'm the federal judge who presided over the proceedings against Officer Kohler today. I'm here because I want to tell you in person that your complaints have been formally entered into the federal record, all 4 of them, and a review board has been ordered to examine every case connected to Officer Kohler's conduct, starting with the incident you reported in 2008. Naomi Reese looked at her for a long moment. "I know who you are," she said. "My granddaughter called me from work. She saw it on the news." A pause. "Are you all right?" Naomi said. And something about the question, its simplicity, its directness, the fact that this woman whose complaint had been dismissed 4 times, whose word had been deemed insufficient by the system Loretta represented, opened her door to a federal judge and asked first if the judge was all right. Something about that opened something in Loretta's chest that had been held closed since 5:45 that morning. "I've had better mornings," she said. Naomi Reese looked at her for another moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. The living room was warm and full of the particular warmth of a room where people actually lived. Not staged, not minimized. Photographs on every surface. A television in the corner. A plant in the window that was doing well despite the winter. The smell of something cooked earlier in the day, still moving through the air. They sat at the kitchen table. Naomi made tea without asking whether tea was wanted. Loretta did not stop her. She watched the deliberate practiced movements of a woman in her own kitchen and thought about her own kitchen, and the light above the stove, and the cup upside down in the drying rack, and the photograph on the shelf. The tea was set down. "No ceremony." 16 years, Naomi said. "Oh, yes. That man did what he did to me 16 years ago. Yes. And I filed 4 times, and they kept telling me I was wrong about what I remembered." "Yes," Loretta said. "They did." Naomi wrapped both hands around her mug, looked at the table, then at Loretta. "My husband drove me to file the first one," she said. "He waited outside in the car because he said if he went in there, he was going to say something he shouldn't." A small pause, the kind that carries something in it. "He passed in 2013. Never heard a word back." Loretta did not speak. There was nothing to say to that which was better than silence. Nothing that was not diminishment dressed up as comfort. "I kept filing after he was gone," Naomi said. "I don't know exactly why. Maybe because stopping felt like saying it didn't happen, like agreeing with them." She looked at Loretta. "You understand that?" "Yes," Loretta said. "I understand that." Naomi studied her, the bruise, the robe, the woman sitting at her kitchen table who had, this morning, been in handcuffs in her own courthouse. "They did that to you today," she said. "In front of your own building, yes. And you went back in, yes." Naomi was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a woman who has had a long time to develop a relationship with her own silence and knows what to do with it. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over Loretta's. Not the formal handshake of institutions, not the careful contact of official business. Just one woman's hand over another woman's hand. The gesture that is older than law, and older than courts, and older than the specific complicated machinery of justice that both women sitting at that table understood the limitations of, and had chosen to believe in anyway. Because what else do you do? Because the alternative is to decide that nothing can be different from what it has been. And neither of these women had ever been able to make that decision. Had tried some mornings, had not managed it. Loretta looked down at their hands, on the thing that had been cracking open in her chest all morning. Open finally, the rest of the way. They sat like that until the tea was cold, and the March light outside the window had shifted from afternoon to the particular amber of early evening, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with anything other than what it already was, which was enough, which was on this particular day, everything. It was nearly 6 o'clock when the cab dropped Loretta back at the courthouse. The building was quieter now. Evening staff, the cleaning crew starting their rounds, the particular end-of-day quality of a large institution settling into itself. Some lights on, some off, the day's business concluded, and the overnight stillness not quite arrived yet. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, went to her office, took off the robe, hung it on the hook behind the door, where it had hung for 21 years, sat at her desk, the coffee mug's okayest judge, the sticky notes in 3 colors, the case files in their 3 stacks, the organized particular chaos of 2 decades of work in one room. She sat for a moment in the quiet. Her left cheek still throbbed. The bruise would look worse tomorrow, before it looked better, which was how bruises worked. She had ice in the small refrigerator in the corner, that she had never used for ice, and she did not use it now either. She thought about Aubrey, who was in New Haven, who had asked, "Are you sure?" at 6:15 this morning, and who had been watching the news all day on whatever combination of apps and alerts that 24-year-olds use to track the world, who did not yet know the specific shape of how the day had resolved. She reached for her phone. The knock on the door came before she could dial. "Come in," she said, expecting Raymond. It was not Raymond. Aubrey came through the door, still in her coat, dark circles under her eyes, the specific look of someone who has driven a very long distance and has not yet decided whether to require simply stay there and be present and let the distance between what she imagined and what she is looking at collapse slowly. Loretta looked at her daughter, at the coat still buttoned, at the dark under her eyes, at the face that was 24 years old and carried somehow the same line of jaw that a woman in a cracked photograph had at 33. "Baby," she said, "you drove. Obviously I drove. That's 9 hours. 8.5. Was no traffic after Gary. You should have called. I did call. You didn't answer, so I drove." Loretta looked at her. "I'm fine," she said. "Mom, Aubrey, you have a bruise the size of a tennis ball on your face. It's smaller than that. It is absolutely not smaller than that." A pause. Not the pause of 2 people who don't know what to say. The pause of 2 people who know each other completely and are doing the thing that people who know each other completely sometimes do. Having the real conversation underneath the surface of the actual words. The one that says, "I was scared all day. I didn't say so. I'm saying it now by being here." Aubrey crossed the room, sat down in the chair across the desk, the chair for visitors, the chair that had held attorneys and clerks and colleagues, and, once, a sitting governor who had needed Loretta's read on something delicate. Today it held Aubrey. "Tell me," she said. "So," Loretta told her, "not all of it, not word for word. The shape of it, the outline, color on the steps, the courtroom." Naomi Reese's 4 complaints read aloud in the room where they had been ignored for 16 years. Caleb Drummond standing up in the 3rd row, the gavel coming down, the cab ride to Englewood with the robe still on because she had not thought to change. 2 women at a kitchen table with tea that went cold while the March light shifted outside the window. Aubrey listened, the way she had always listened, with all of herself. No phone, no half-presence. The full gravity of someone who believed that being truly heard was something you gave a person deliberately, not accidentally. She had gotten that from Calvin, or from watching Loretta watch Calvin, or from some combination of both that had become, over 24 years, simply the way she was. When Loretta finished, the office was quiet for a moment. "You went to Englewood," Aubrey said. "In your robe. I forgot to change." Aubrey looked at her, then she made a sound, not a laugh exactly, but in the family of laugh. The sound of someone who loves a person completely and finds them, sometimes, remarkably and incorrigibly themselves. Mom, she said, what you are the most, don't. Completely. Aubrey, I'm not going to stop, I know you're not. But Loretta was smiling, for the first time all day, a real one.
Not the quiet, calculated smile on the courthouse steps. Not the composed expression she had maintained through the longest morning she had had in 21 years on the bench. A real smile.
The kind Calvin used to say looked like her mother. The kind that came from somewhere genuine and did not ask permission. Aubrey came around the desk. She sat on the arm of Loretta's chair, the way she had sat when she was small, in a different chair in a different city, before any of this had been Loretta's life. When Aubrey was small enough to fit in the curve of one arm, and Loretta was young enough to think she knew what the years ahead were going to ask of her, she put her head on her mother's shoulder. Loretta put her arm around her daughter. They sat. Outside the window, Chicago in the last of the March evening. The city in that specific hour between day and night when the lights are coming on, but the sky has not yet committed to dark. West Jackson Boulevard below them, steady with the ordinary movement of people going home. Somewhere south of Hill, on West 63rd Street in Englewood, Naomi Reese was probably at her kitchen table, with the welcome mat at her door, and 4 complaints now entered into a federal record that had ignored them for 16 years. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, Brant Collar was beginning to understand what 22 years felt like from the inside. Somewhere in New Haven, or rather here, in this office, because she had gotten in the car and driven, Aubrey was present in the particular way that mattered most. What happens tomorrow? Aubrey asked, her voice quiet against Loretta's shoulder. Tomorrow I come back to work, just like that. Just like that. A pause. The Peterson case is to next week, Loretta said. The defense needed more time. Of course they did. I gave it to them. Aubrey lifted her head, looked at her mother with the expression of someone who has known a person her entire life and is still, occasionally, struck by the consistency of them. Of course you did, she said. Loretta looked at the desk, at the world's okaykest judge mug, at the sticky notes in 3 colors, at the small framed photograph on the bookshelf, the one from the courthouse lobby that someone had given her years ago, the woman at the podium, the man grinning behind her, 21 years. Look what we built, Cal. Look what they tried to take. Look what's still standing. She held her daughter a little closer, and outside the city kept going, the way cities do, carrying everything it had ever been and everything it had not yet become, moving through the March night toward whatever the next morning was going to ask of it. In March of 2024, Officer Brant Collar was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Lieutenant Vance Pritchett and 6 other officers were taken into federal custody the same day, charges of conspiracy against a federal judicial officer. All 7 were indicted by a grand jury 31 days later. 89 cases connected to Collar's 17-year record were referred to the Independent Federal Review Board ordered by Judge Winslow. In the first 8 months of review, 7 wrongful convictions were overturned. 31 additional cases resulted in vacated charges or reduced sentences. The county allocated $11.4 million in compensation to affected individuals and families, drawn directly from the police department's operational budget. Caleb Drummond received $1.3 million in wrongful conviction compensation. He enrolled at the University of Illinois Chicago in the fall of 2024. He is studying public policy. He has not decided yet what he will do with it. He is 22 years old and he has time, which is a thing that was taken from him and has been imperfectly and incompletely returned. Naomi Reese's 4 complaints, filed in 2008, 2010, 2014, and 2019, were formally entered into the federal record and cited as foundational evidence in the review board's findings on complaint dismissal practices. She submitted a written statement to the board. 7 pages, handwritten. The clerk who received it made 3 copies before filing the original because it was the kind of document that should exist in more than one place. Tomas Ibarra's case was reviewed by the Federal Oversight Board. His cooperation was documented. His amended testimony was noted. His phone call at 11:47 p.m. on March 11th was noted. He was suspended for 60 days without pay. No criminal charges were filed. He resigned from the department 4 months after the proceedings concluded. He is currently enrolled in a community conflict resolution certification program. He has not yet decided if it is enough. He is working on deciding. Diane Stoll resigned from the prosecutor's office in April. No charges were filed against her in connection with the March 12th proceedings. She is in private practice. Acting Judge Clifford Oakes retired in June, 2 months ahead of the schedule he had been counting down to for the better part of a year. Francis Chu, court reporter, received a commendation from the Chief Judge's office for the accuracy and completeness of her transcript from the proceedings of March 12, 2024. She keeps a printed copy in the bottom drawer of her desk at home. She is not entirely sure why. It seems like the kind of thing that should be somewhere you can put your hands on it. Raymond Sub still works at the courthouse. Every morning he passes the placard in the hallway on his way to his post. He has never needed to straighten it. It has never been crooked. He checks anyway. Judge Loretta May Winslow returned to courtroom 3 the following Monday. She woke at 5:45, made coffee in the kitchen with the light above the stove and the photograph on the shelf, and the cup she set upside down in the drying rack. She picked up the briefcase, black leather, worn at the corners. The clasp had been replaced over the weekend. She had finally gotten around to it. She looked at the photograph one more time. The woman at the podium. The man behind her, 21 years ago, and still go grinning like a man who knew exactly how this was going to go. She picked up her keys and went to work. Justice doesn't always arrive when you need it. But when she does, she remembers everyone she kept waiting